Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for your patience. My name is Tanya Long. I am Senior Manager, National Education for Osteoporosis Canada, and I am very pleased to be your moderator today. Welcome and thank you very much for coming. Before we start, just a couple of housekeeping matters. You can enter your questions in the question box to the right of your screen, or if you happen to be on an iPhone, there may be an icon, a question icon at the bottom. We will answer your questions as best we can given the time available, and will address others after the webinar is over. Please keep your questions relevant to the topic of exercise at home, and please remember that we cannot provide medical advice to specific individual questions. A notice will be sent soon after the webinar ends about an archived version. During this time of physical distancing and self-isolation, it is important to stay active. Our topic today is types of exercise that you can do at home that are good for bone health and fall and fracture prevention. Our presenter today is Dr. Lora Giangregorio. Dr. Gregorio is a professor in the Department of Kinesiology at the University of Waterloo. Her specialties are mobility and aging and research into the science of aging. Dr. Giangregorio, it is a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thanks very much for that introduction. I'm just going to show my slides here. Okay, hopefully you can see them. Can you see them, Tanya? Yes?
Yes, I can.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, I just want to reiterate that this presentation is to give general advice about what strength, balance, and aerobic exercises are. I can't sort of prescribe what is good for an individual because I don't have the individual in front of me to assess them. So it's more just about what these exercises are and to give you a lot of examples. And I'll talk a little bit about the evidence around different types of exercise. I think for an individual person, they might need to, think about what's right for them, use appropriate footwear, support objects like a walker or a cane or a counter if needed. So thinking about, what you actually need for yourself and consulting a physician or an exercise professional if you need individualized guidance. So just keeping that in mind, I want to start with, sort of thinking about what your goals should be. So we know this is an image that shows, how muscle mass and strength changes over the lifespan. And you can see that kind of peaks in our youth, and then it kind of goes, declines over time. But the rate at which it declines can vary from person to person. And so some people will experience a decline, but they still are very strong even in older age, and other people experience much larger declines. And so thinking about that, we can also see similar declines when we look at, our fitness level, our aerobic capacity, our balance, even range of motion, a lot of similar declines. And there's a lot of variability in how we change with age. And some of that has to do with how, how much physical activity we do, how much strength training we do. So thinking about choosing a goal to work on. And it can be many goals, and some people might have the goal of just having less pain. So what are the things that they can do to improve their back pain or knee pain or hip pain? So you have to think about what your goals are. And I want to also point out that I got a list of questions that people had posted, and I went through many of them and tried to answer them throughout the presentation. But as I understand, we're going to try to answer them afterwards if we don't get to them. So move on there. So this is another picture, and it shows kind of muscle mass over time and how it can change with age. And what you can see is there's a little red line, and that red line is talking about, there's sort of the age-related decline, but then there's other things that can increase the decline. So for example, if you get really ill and you're hospitalized for a prolonged period and you're not moving a lot, then you can lose a lot more muscle than someone who is regularly active every day. Or if you have a lot of inflammation or other things that can exacerbate decline. So we want to think, so here this COVID-19 pandemic is a good example of where, we might experience reduced physical activity because we're not going out and doing the things we normally do. So we need to prevent those little dips from happening. And one of the things we can do is think about how we can design an exercise program at home to do that. And so I'm really inspired by people who are able to maintain physical activity as they age. And here's a gentleman who reached the summit of Mount Everest 3 times after the age of 70, and at 80 became the oldest person to reach the summit after 4 heart surgeries. And his advice, which I found really inspiring, was you need a target, however big or small, and build your health and fitness towards it. So a lot of the questions that were sent to me before here were, what is the best type of exercise for X? Or what is the best type of exercise for a person with osteoporosis? And there is no best program or best type of exercise. You have to figure out where you are now and what your goals are, and think about where you should start. Because there is a program that I would definitely want everybody to be doing. There isn't a program I would want everybody to be doing, but there's, you know, sort of a place where you could try to move towards, right? So everybody should try to move towards building their strength and improving their cardiovascular fitness and improving their balance and trying to reduce pain. But you can't do all of that at once. And you can't just all of a sudden go to the gym and lift really heavy weights. You have to progress. So start with, where are you now? And then where can you start moving towards? Sorry, it's things moving on me. Okay, and the other thing I want to address is, a lot of people think about body weight as, you know, being really important. So we always, you know, want to look better or be thinner for our health. And I really want to emphasize that it's not just about losing weight. So these are some diagrams from a study where they actually gave 4 different groups of people a diet to lose weight. They were all overweight. They were obese older adults, people who were over the age of 65. They all went on a diet. And so one group just got the diet, one group got the diet plus an aerobic training program, one group got the diet plus a strength training program, and one got the diet plus both types of training programs. And the changes they saw depended on the program. So if people who got the aerobic training program improved their aerobic fitness, but the strength training program didn't improve it as much. However, the exercise groups all lost a little bit of bone mineral density. The resistance training program, because when you lose weight, you lose bone as well, right? So you lose fat, muscle, and bone. You don't just lose fat. And so people who are losing a lot of weight might lose some bone. And the resistance training program actually you know, helped to prevent some of that loss. The aerobic and combination program didn't as much, so they lost more bone. But then strength improved more in the resistance and the combination group than the aerobic group. So really depends on the goal that you're looking at, right? So strength will improve with resistance training, aerobic fitness will improve with aerobic training. So probably we should do a little bit of both. Gosh, it's driving me crazy. Okay. So starting with, where are you at? So think about, you know, so if I was in, you know, a fitness facility, or if I was in a lab, I would do a bunch of tests of someone's fitness and physical function to see where they were at before I would decide on an exercise program. Now, I can't do that because there's, you know, hundreds of you, and also you're at home and I'm at home and I can't see you. But I could ask you some questions like, how far do you feel comfortable walking? Could you walk a mile, 2 miles? At what pace are you comfortable walking at? Maybe you're not comfortable, maybe you're only comfortable walking 100 yards. Maybe you don't really walk very much because you feel like your mobility is limited. So that's one thing to think about. Okay, if I'm not comfortable walking, how can I improve my endurance or reduce the pain so that I can walk more? Or how do you feel when you climb stairs? If you feel really winded, maybe you need to work on your aerobic fitness or your strength for the stairs. How many times can you get in and out of a chair in 30 seconds? And do you use the arms for support or not? And so if you find that really hard, then maybe you need to work on your lower extremity strength. How many push-ups can you do on the wall, counter, or floor? If you can't do very many, maybe you need to work on your upper body strength. How long can you stand feet together with your feet together? So if you use a walker or a cane, you know, can you even stand without it? So if you can't, then maybe it's balance that you need to work on. So thinking about what are the things that you want to work on? What are the things that you're not good at? And that's maybe where you should start. For posture, standing against the wall with your buttocks and feet and shoulders against the wall. Can your head touch? What does your best posture look like? Do you find it hard to stand upright? Do you get aching in your upper back, maybe it's back extensor muscles. So thinking about all these things, you know, start with a goal rather than trying to say what is the best program for all of these things, because it might be difficult to do all of them at once. So one example is a 4-point balance test. So, you know, this is something that we use where we actually look at people's balance and see, you know, can they stand with feet together for 10 seconds? Can they stand with their feet a little bit ajar for, or like just heel to toe for 10 seconds? And if they can't, then we start thinking about, okay, maybe we want to work on a balance exercise. And I mentioned the chair rise test. So how many times can you get in and out of a chair without using your hands in 30 seconds? And there's actually normative data to show how many you should be able to do depending on your age. So for example, if your age is between 64 and 69, women should be able to do somewhere between 11 and 16, and men between 12 and 18. So if you're a little low on that, then maybe you need to work on your balance or your lower extremity strength to be able to do more of those things. So one of the questions I get a lot is what types of exercise prevent falls? So the best types of exercise are exercises that are fit under the category of balance and functional training. So things that challenge your balance or involve functional tasks, task-specific training, like chair stands, like getting in and out of a chair. Those have been shown to prevent falls. Tai Chi has also been shown to prevent falls, or programs that combine strength training with balance and functional training. Interestingly, the data on dance and strength training and walking, there isn't good data to show that it actually prevents falls. So if your goal is improving your balance and trying to prevent falls, then you want to do some type of balance and functional training or Tai Chi. And so there's lots of ways that you can challenge your balance. Excuse me. So you can reduce your contact with support. So if you're a person who uses a cane or a walker, maybe then you can stand, you know, with the walker and slowly just to touch your fingertips to it, or stand with the walker but put your feet together. That's so keeping your feet closer together is another way to challenge your balance. So reducing your contact with supports. So some people will do things like stand on one foot to reduce keep their feet closer together, but they find they're unstable, so they're hold on to a counter. So maybe it's holding onto the counter, but then just gently sort of letting go for a moment, and then you know, seeing if you can hold your balance, but always making sure you have a support object nearby in case you do lose your balance. So reducing your contact with that support object, keeping your feet closer together, that reduces your base of support. We're balancing on one foot. Shifting your weight. So for example, let's say that you stand with your feet together and you feel a bit wobbly, and you do that for, you know, every day for a week, and now you're feeling a bit more stable. Maybe then you stand with your feet together and you start shifting from heel to toe a little bit, and shifting your weight will actually challenge your balance. Or respond to something that upsets your balance. So for example, I have the photo there of a lady in pink standing on one foot, and that's really easy for her. So give her the task of tossing a ball back and forth, because now she's shifting her weight to try to, you know, and respond to where the ball is. Or do activities that require coordination while moving. So if doing things like standing on one foot or standing with feet together are too easy for you, maybe doing things like stepping wide and small, like in and out of a ladder, like in the picture. So thinking about how do you do things that challenge your balance, and ultimately you want to pick an exercise where you feel a bit unstable, but you're able to hold it without falling. So you don't want to pick an activity that you're going to fall. So you have to find a good balance between it being challenging enough that you can hold it without falling, and maybe have a support object nearby to make sure that you don't fall, but not so challenging that it's going to cause you to fall. And always remembering to wear appropriate footwear, and again, having a support object nearby. So Osteoporosis Canada has a booklet that has lots of different examples, and I've shown them here. I won't go through all of them, but you can download it for free in English and French on the website. And I would recommend doing something that challenges your balance every day. You can also integrate it into your other activities. So if you're a person who goes out walking every day, maybe you incorporate step-ups into your walk, or a tandem walk where you walk heel to toe for a little while, or maybe you do some walking lunges. So thinking about ways to incorporate balance challenges into the activities that you already do. Or maybe you're waiting for the kettle and you stand on one foot and shift your weight, or things like that. There's also an app, it's called Clock Yourself. It's a really neat app. Basically, it's $2 to download, and it gets you to visualize a clock on the floor, and then it'll call out numbers at random, and you have to step to the numbers. And so it's kind of challenging you to react quickly. And you can set it to do it for 30 seconds, for 1 minute. You can change the speed to make it harder or easier. You can also add brain games, so it'll do things like yell February, and you have to know that that's 2 o'clock, and then step to the month. So there's lots of different variations to make it challenging. And so that's a fun little activity you can do at home if you think that you can do that safely. What types of exercise improve bone strength? I get this question a lot, and this is a really hard question to answer. So we have a lot of animal studies that show that activities that involve higher impact, like jumping, or high frequency, so lots of short bouts, or strain rate, or quick, dynamic, short movements, are good for bone health. When we transition this to human studies, it's a bit more complicated. A lot of the studies that have been done in humans are done in healthy people. They're not often done in people with chronic conditions, where it's hard to do impact exercise. And often people with osteoporosis are excluded from the studies because they're often on osteoporosis medication, or they're worried about the risk. So there's actually very few studies that have looked at whether or not exercise can improve bone density or reduce fractures in people with osteoporosis. If we look at the data that's been in, say, postmenopausal women or other groups, there's some research to suggest that activities that involve impact or progressive resistance training, or combining those types of training, may be effective for bone mineral density. So our goal is to try to combine impact exercise with progressive resistance training. Now, many people will do strength training or strength training exercises, but they don't necessarily progress them to the intensity that was used in some of these studies. And it's hard because the types of exercises that are used in a lot of these studies, often require someone to teach you how to do them and also progress the intensity, help you progress the intensity safely. So it's hard to find a balance between doing something that's safe on your own versus getting some instruction. But you can certainly start learning some strength exercises, and then eventually getting some advice on how to progress them safely. I did have a question about, someone had asked about the Lift More trial, which is a trial done in Australia. And what they did was they actually did high impact, jumps and high intensity strength training, so lifting quite heavy weights. And they did see increases in bone mineral density. And I will say that took a while to progress people to that level of training. So they didn't start people jumping right away. They started with lower impact activity and gradually increased the impact over time. They also had highly trained people teaching people how to do the resistance training exercise and progress them slowly over time. So it's not like they started heavy resistance training right away. And also, many of the people in those studies didn't really have shoulder problems or hip problems or mobility problems. So it was a fairly healthy group of people with low bone mass. It's not to say, though, that everybody can't do progressive resistance training. I think everyone can. You just have to start where you're at and then progress over time. I also had activities about whether light activities like chores or walking or pole walking would increase bone mineral density. And unfortunately, there isn't data to suggest that that's true. So the types of exercise that are known to improve bone density are usually involve impact exercise or progressive resistance training or strength training. So how do we get stronger? Well, I like to think of strength training as really just a bunch of movements that we do, and we just make them harder and harder and harder for ourselves. So we push, we pull, we squat, we lunge, we hinge at the hips, carry things, or reach or press overhead. And so a lot of these things you do every day. And so if you want to be able to be strong in doing those things every day, you have to find ways to do those movements and challenge yourself. So I'm going to give you a bunch of examples of several of these movements, just to give you a sense of how to progress that over time. But before I do that, it's really, really important that for every exercise that you do, you actually do it with good posture and with activating the muscles that support your spine to make sure that your spine is supported. And you do this in all of your exercises. So right now, I want you to think about sitting or standing tall. Oops, sorry. sitting or standing tall, and then thinking about setting your shoulders. So what you want to do is imagine that you are pulling your shoulders apart. Okay, so all of a sudden you should feel your chest lift a little bit. So you lift your chest, sit nice and tall, and then we're going to activate our core. And you can do this sitting or standing, but the idea that, so you can think of it a couple ways. So one is, I like to think about it as me wearing a belt, and I'm just going to use my belly muscles to pull my belt up a little bit, or bring my ribs down and my belt up. So you should feel your belly muscles, your abs go on, or think about bracing your abs. Or another way to think about it is imagine someone's going to poke you in the stomach. And what will you do? You would tighten up a little bit, right? So you're going to set your shoulders, sit tall, set your shoulders, tighten up your stomach, and then keep your head, neck, and spine aligned. And then if you're standing, you would balance your weight evenly on both feet. So anytime you go to approach an exercise, whether it's a squat or a push-up or anything like that, you should think about setting your shoulders, activating your spine, and keeping your body aligned. And even thinking about practicing that every day. So that's one step towards improving your posture. So now once we've got our good posture, we're going to go through some ideas around exercises. So a hinge is a classic exercise that I use in the gym. I do it with weights, but we can start without weights. And the reason why we would choose to do this exercise is to keep our hamstrings strong and flexible. It also works on our back extensor muscles and our glutes, or the muscles in our bum. So again, you start by standing tall. You want to bend at your hips, not your spine. You want to look out at the floor in front of you, and then you're going to push through the floor, so push through your feet back to standing. So I got a video here, hopefully it'll show for you, of a very easy version, and I call it a wall tap hip hinge. It's basically touching your bum to the wall. So, and I'm going to show you closer and then further away from the wall. So you can see how I'm bending my hip, my spine. Then I move forward a little bit. That's a little bit harder. Bending at the hips, see the nice tall posture. Okay, so that's a hinge. So learning how to hinge at the hips is important, and then we can progress that exercise. So here's what I call a broomstick hinge. And this is, you know, basically allowing the broomstick to just slide down your thighs, almost as if it's touching your thighs as you do it. So it shouldn't go way out in front of you. So you'll see the nice tall posture. Shoulders, and I'm slowly lowering the broomstick down my thighs, but see how my posture stays tall? I'm still keeping my chest lifted and I'm looking out in front of me, okay? And here's another variation. I've used a TheraBand between my thighs. I'm going to do the exact same thing, hinging at the hips, but keeping myself nice and tall, right? And that's really good for your back extensors and for your bum muscles. And this is something, so going back to the Lift More trial, they did this exercise, but they did it holding a bar with weights. That's not something I would start anyone on right away. I would start with movements like this and teach them good form, and then gradually add weight. But not all people, but it's something where I'd really want someone to make sure that they're doing it properly before recommending people kind of go off and do it on their own. And that's where you might need some coaching. So here, there's other ways to do this exercise. So you can do it lying on a bed, right? So if you do a bridge exercise where you kind of lift your pelvis off a mattress, either with one leg, like the gentleman in the photo, or just with both feet on the floor, lifting your pelvis up, that's also a hinge because you're bending at the hips, not the spine. So that's a way to do it on your bed, but still strengthen those muscles. And in fact, a lot of people could start just with that exercise. Now, if that hinge exercise gets really easy, another way to progress it is to do it on one leg. And so this is an advanced version, and I'm using a broomstick for balance, so I don't fall over, but it's just bending forward with one leg instead of two, right? And again, this is a more advanced version, so I'd want someone to master the wall tap hip hinge or the broomstick hip hinge before moving to something like this. And whatever version they're doing, I would get them to start with 3 to 5 repetitions, really focus on form, lower for 4 seconds. So the lowering part where I bend forward is 4 seconds long, and then I take 2 seconds to return back to the top. Then I would do 2 to 3 sets of 3 to 5 repetitions. And then over time, I would increase the number of repetitions I do up to 12. And then I would potentially increase the number of sets, and then I might progress to a harder version. And then I would repeat that process. And so the idea is that, and then if you got really good at it, you could do this one-legged hinge without the broomstick. So another exercise is a squat or a sit to stand. So anyone who can get out of a chair can do this exercise. It's basically sitting with your feet flat, then sitting with your nice tall posture. So again, bracing your abs, setting your shoulders, looking forward, and then getting in and out of the chair. And the reason why we do this exercise is to improve lower leg and hip muscle strength and mobility. So people talk about having pain in their hips and their back. If we want to work on our leg and hip muscles, we need to do exercises like this. And so, but you know, being strong in your squat will then help you get out of a chair, help you get off the ground, and help you with things getting on the ground like gardening. And so this is a basic version, a sit to stand, where you just get in and out of the chair without using the hands. If you can't get out of a chair without using the hands, then start with just getting in and out using the hands, but do more repetitions. So get in and out of your chair 3 times while using the arms for support. Eventually increase the number of times that you do it. Then practice trying to do it without the hands for support. So that's an example of how to progress that. Then there's different variations. So then you could potentially do it without the chair, or maybe bend a little bit deeper. Or you could add a weight. Now you need to hold it right next to your chest. So this guy's holding a little bit out in front, but the idea is hold it right nice and tight to your chest. But you could do that with a bag of rice, or something that you don't have to have a kettlebell. The idea is that you master your squat using your body weight first, and then you start adding weight. So the tips I would say for a squat or a sit to stand is really focusing on setting your shoulders, having good posture, bracing your abs, and then thinking about pushing your knees out. So meaning like away from the midline. So a lot of people will have their knees kind of fall inward towards the midline, but you actually want to push your knees out as you do a squat, and looking out at the floor in front of you. And some people might need to do a squat or a sit to stand with their feet kind of wider apart, and some people feel more comfortable doing it a little bit close together. I mentioned that we do pushes and pulls. So there's lots of ways to do a pull exercise. And so I really like this W exercise that's on the top right here. And that's an exercise that helps our external rotators, the muscles that rotate our shoulders out. A lot of people have rounded shoulders as they get older, so their front shoulder muscles get really tight, and so they don't have good mobility in their shoulders, and so their shoulders are rounded. So this W exercise is a really good way to rotate your shoulders out and work on the muscles that do that. Another reason to do pull exercises is to work on your upper back muscles for your posture. So you can do it seated with a TheraBand, just like the gentleman here, where you put it around your foot and you just pull backwards. You want to think about using the muscles in the middle of your back. So if everyone could make at home, just sit there and make a W with your arms like the gentleman in the photo. And if you just squeeze your shoulder blades together, you'll feel those muscles go on, and you feel your the muscles in the middle of your back go on if you just rotate your arms outward slightly. And so even just doing it without weight, you can do it seated, you can do it standing, but the idea of thinking about rotating your shoulders outward, bringing your shoulder blades together in the middle of your back, that's the idea of working those upper back muscles. There's lots of other versions of exercises that you can do as a pull. So some people will use a suspension trainer. That's the picture in the middle of the lady with the pink shirt. She's using a suspension trainer to do a pull exercise and standing. You can also do a bent over row exercise like the gentleman in the photo. I think I have an example of that. Do I? I do. Good. Okay. So you have, so I'll show you the video here. This is the W exercise. Make your W. So you can do that sitting or standing. You don't necessarily need to do it standing. And you can do it with no resistance and just work on rotating your shoulders in and out and working those muscles of the upper back. And then if you get really good at it, you can add a resistance band. This is much harder. I actually find this quite difficult to do. But the idea of keeping your wrists stable, so see my wrists aren't moving, it's just moving at my shoulders. And that works those upper back muscles. And then if you want to do a bent over row, you don't necessarily need to have weights. You could take a water jug or some other thing. You want to make sure you're bending at the hips, not the spine, and your upper back should form a tabletop, and you just pull straight back. So you see my spine is not rotating. The only thing that's moving is my arm, and you just pull straight back, and that will work those upper back muscles and your biceps. And then when you get back up again, you want to make sure you push your feet through the floor so that you're lifting with you're getting up, you're not flexing at the spine, you're using your leg muscles to lift yourself up and your back extensors. So we also can do push exercises. My favorite is the push-up, but there's lots of different versions of the push-up. You can do a push-up on a wall like the gentleman here. You can do a push-up on a counter or a table, as long as the table's not going to move when you push on it. Or you could take a resistance band and loop it around your back and push outwards with your hands. And you can do that sitting or standing. Again, remembering to, before you start, you set your shoulders, brace your core muscles, make sure your head, neck, and shoulders are aligned, and so that your body forms a straight line from your heels to the back of your neck. I have a link here to a tutorial on how to do a push-up, and it also goes through kind of different variations. But you know, just starting with a wall push-up or a counter push-up is a good start. And similarly with reach, so lots of people develop problems with shoulder mobility. I actually do this in my class. When I teach university students, I get them to do this exercise, and a lot of them have problems with shoulder mobility, even at a young age. And so I usually start with people standing a little bit away from the wall, like so you see the feet are about a foot away from the wall, but the bum and the shoulders are touching the wall, and just kind of reaching overhead, but keeping your elbows and your wrists straight, so not bending at the elbows and not bending at the wrists, and seeing, can I touch the wall? And if you can't, then that's the perfect place to start that exercise, is just doing repetitions of going, lifting overhead like that to work on your shoulder mobility. If you're seated, you can also do that as long as you sit nice and tall with your core nice and tight. You can also do that exercise in seated. And then as you get better, you can maybe add a resistance band, just like the gentleman in the photo where he's actually pressing overhead with the resistance band to work on his shoulder muscle strength. I think that lifting weights overhead, if you have osteoporosis, I would not do without guidance. I would make sure to consult a qualified exercise professional, because for some people it may be too risky, or they might need to start working on range of motion and mobility first before progressing to lifting weights overhead. So it's not something I would advise people doing without guidance. When you're doing any strength training exercise, we want to first focus on form and alignment. So we want to make sure that we're doing it with good form. Then we progress the number of reps and the number of sets that we do and the intensity. And usually we want to do strength training at a high degree of effort. So lots of people will do strength training exercises, but they might not be working hard enough. So you want to actually feel like it's really hard, like in the yellow to orange range of this scale. So 1 is really light activity and 10 is the hardest work you have ever done. It almost feels impossible to keep going. And so you want to actually be working somewhere between 8 and 9, or even 7 and 9 when you're doing strength training. So your last few reps should be quite difficult. And again, as I mentioned, you lower the weight for 4 seconds and you lift for 2 seconds. Somebody asked me, is it okay to use TheraBands instead of weights? And my answer to that is, it doesn't matter what you use as long as you're working hard enough. Now, some of the research has suggested that to really increase bone density, you need to be working at high intensity. So that might mean eventually progressing to heavier weights, but you can do quite difficult exercise with body weight and with TheraBands if you're doing it properly. But at some point you may need to progress beyond that because you may need more of a challenge. But most people, I would not start with heavy weights. They can start with body weight exercises and TheraBands and eventually progress towards a more challenging program. But again, you might need to get some advice on how to do that properly and safely from someone who is bone fit trained or from someone who has expertise on how to do that safely. When we think about aerobic physical activity, that's like things like walking and running and dancing and rowing and those sorts of things, things that get our heart pumping. That's our Canadian physical activity guidelines suggest that we do that, and we do at least 150 minutes a week. Given that we're at home a lot, it'd be a good idea to try to fit some in every day so that we're not sitting all day. And research suggests that if you do activities that involve impact that are dynamic, that's better for bones. That said, the research around the effects of walking on bone mineral density is pretty weak, so it may have an effect on spine bone density, but there's very little evidence that it increases hip bone density, and in fact that you might need to do higher impact activity to increase bone density. The problem with that is that there's also risk inherent with high intensity activity, especially for people with very low bone density or existing vertebral fractures. So what I usually say is figure out where you're at and progress slowly. So even in those studies that have used high impact training, like the LIFTMOR trial, they didn't start people with high impact. They started them with lower impact and progressed them over time. So if you're not active at all, then maybe you want to find an activity you can do for 10 minutes a day and just work on building that into your schedule. And then eventually doing it for 30 minutes, and then maybe trying to complete the distance that you did in 30 minutes, but in less time, or increasing the intensity. Or maybe you try a new activity, like maybe you try dancing or doing movement snacks where you do sets of your stairs multiple times a day. Or it may be if you find it hard to do aerobic physical activity, you could do your strength exercises, but do them in a circuit so that your heart stays elevated. So maybe you alternate doing squats and wall push-ups and that sort of thing, and then take a very brief rest in between. What you want to be doing is an activity where you feel like you're working hard, that you might be able to carry on a conversation, but you couldn't sing a song while doing it, like you'd have to stop before singing a song. Someone asked if they should do rowing. There's no studies that randomize people to rowing and not rowing and seeing if they fracture. So I really can't answer whether or not rowing is going to cause fractures. I do know that rowing does involve some flexion and it's seated. So if you're a person who's never rowed before, then it might not be a good exercise to start if you have osteoporosis. If someone has been rowing for years and they've got really good form, it might be okay for them to continue, but that's really a question I would answer on an individual basis. So for most people, I would say start with low or moderate impact activities and progress the time or the intensity over time. And some people can progress to high impact activities, but that should be done with guidance from an exercise professional. Now, a lot of people want to know what they can do for their posture, and I think it's really important for everybody to consider doing things for their core or abdominal exercises and their back extensors, and those are the things that will help improve our posture and stabilize our spine. So my favorites are planks, side planks, farmer's carries, bird dogs, and stir the pot. So farmer's carries and stir the pot are more advanced, but most people can find a version of a plank or a side plank or a bird dog that they can do safely. So I have a video here that will show 3 different versions of a plank. So hopefully you can see that. So I'm going to get into plank position. Now I'm doing it on the floor on my toes and elbows. You can also do it from your knees instead of your toes if you find this difficult, or you can do it on a counter. Now I'm going to do a planked push-up. So I'm making it harder by going up and down. This is actually a really hard exercise because I have to try to keep my spine stable while going up and down. So this will also work my triceps and my chest, or if I'm trying to learn how to do a push-up, this is a really good way to build the strength. And now what I'm doing is I'm extending my hip. So you can see I'm doing a plank with a hip extension. So I'm making the plank harder by adding a hip extension. So this is working my back extensor muscles and my core. It's really, really hard. So those are 3 different versions of a plank that people can do. Now those are hard. Those would be people who have mastered the plank and want to progress that. Now, if that's too hard, you can do a plank on a wall, or you can do it on a counter or on some stable surface. And so I have an example here where I'm doing it on a chair. Not the best idea, but what I had in the basement. but the idea of doing it on a surface that's a little higher makes it a little bit easier for you. So I'm going to get into my plank position with my arms, and then I can make it a bit more challenging by doing it on my forearms. And if I want to try my plank to push up, I can do that as well. Or I could just do a plank on my forearms. And I can do the same thing on the wall as well, that exercise too. When we choose core exercises, we want to think about choosing exercises. So the ones that might be risky are those that involve flexing our spine forward or twisting our spine. So there's lots of abdominal exercises like sit-ups where we're flexing our spine, or doing rapid movements where we twist. And those are the types of things, if we have osteoporosis, we probably want to avoid. So planks are great because we keep our spine stable while we're doing them. To make them harder, you can add movement. And so what I did with my son today is he set up a pyramid of cups, and I had to rearrange the pyramid of cups while I was in the plank position. And he gave me that challenge to do. So there's lots of different ways to make it harder. People with stiff hips and spine would really benefit from doing planks and bird dogs, some lunges, bridge exercises, which I already showed you. There's other exercises as well. Someone asked what they should do if they have a spine fracture. So if someone has a spine fracture and they have pain, there's really actually very little research on what you should do when it comes to exercise. So all of this is based on anecdotal evidence and not on clinical trials. But we suggest you start by lying in this position. It's like a modified Shavasana, if you know yoga, where you have your palms up. And this will actually passively extend the spine and stretch the front shoulder and chest muscles. And then eventually you can add exercises in this position. So a gentle chest lift, but we recommend that people actually lie in this position if they have pain due to spine fractures for 15 or 20 minutes a couple times a day. And then you can add exercises. So here's an example of an exercise that can be done in that position, where you actually imagine you bring your arm overhead and you imagine lengthening your arm, and you hold that for 3 to 5 seconds, and then you release, and then you repeat, and you do that anywhere between 5 and 10 times, and that can work on the back extensor muscles. This is another version of that exercise, but it's much harder. So this is what we would progress someone to if they didn't have spine fractures, or they were recovered from spine fractures. And this is a pretty challenging exercise to do properly, because you want to make sure that your arm and leg are stable and that you're not twisting. So a lot of people will kind of lose their balance as they do this. So you can start with just doing the arm or just doing the leg, and you just want to extend the arm in front of you or extend the leg behind you while keeping your spine stable. And you want to hold it for 3 to 5 seconds and then release, and then repeat it 5 to 10 times. And then once you get good at it, you can do both the arm and the leg, opposite arm and leg at the same time. And again, holding for 3 to 5 seconds and then release, and then repeating 5 to 10 times. This is a version where you don't have to get down on the floor, so you can do it on a chair. And again, you can do it with just the arm, just the leg, or you can do it with both. And again, holding 3 to 5 seconds, and then releasing, and then repeating that. Just make sure that the chair is against the wall, so it's not going to slide out in front of you, or do it on a stable surface. I got many, many questions about what is safe when it comes to yoga and Pilates, and what is effective. And I can tell you that there are some studies that suggest that yoga and Pilates may improve physical function and balance, but there are no good studies on its effect on bone health in people with osteopenia or osteoporosis or falls. So I cannot conclude that it will increase your bone density or reduce fractures. There are some case reports of fractures during yoga, and they often occur during activities that involve spinal flexion. So, and I'll give you examples of some of those movements. So if you really like doing yoga, and you don't have a lot of spine fractures and you're not very high risk and you want to do it, you want to think about looking for a class or instructor that knows what to do for osteoporosis, and focus on controlling the posture, not on intensity. So you don't want to like really push yourself or move really quickly. The types of movements that may be risky are ones that involve full bend, spinal flexion, or full twists or hip rotation, anything that is weighted, or combining sitting and twisting. or things that are done rapidly or repetitively, or things that involve high fall risk. So there's some yoga postures that have you balance on one leg with your one foot on your thigh, so like tree pose, for example. And if you lose your balance and fall, you may hurt yourself, so you may want to have a support object nearby. And so some examples of the twists and flexion that we want to avoid are things like the forward fold, where you're hanging without supporting your hands on your thighs, spinal rocking, ragdoll. Some of these poses should probably be avoided. Whether it is safe for an individual to do it really depends on that person's risk and their familiarity with the poses, and knowing how to use their ab muscles to support their spine while they're doing the poses. So if you're new to yoga, I wouldn't start it without consulting an instructor who knows how to modify it for osteoporosis. If you've been doing it for years, just be mindful of avoiding postures that involve spinal flexion or twisting, and making sure that you know how to modify movements that involve spinal flexion or twisting, and use your core to support your spine. So that was really quick, because I know we don't have a lot of time, but I wanted to give some ideas of, thinking about where you're at now and what's one thing you could work on, because it's really hard to change a whole bunch of things at once. So thinking about one thing or one new exercise to introduce into your program, and then progressing that over time. So what's one thing you could work on? What's a version of that exercise that you can do with good form, at least 3 to 5 repetitions? And then working on that and trying to do more repetitions and then more sets, and then maybe adding a new exercise or progressing that exercise. Osteoporosis Canada has a lot of resources. If you Google Too Fit to Fracture or use the link here, and we will be creating new resources in future. There's also a group in the UK, they have a Facebook page called Make Movement Your Mission that you can join if you want to do movement snacks. These are very light sort of balance and light physical activity, but it gives people something to do, with a community of people on Facebook if you need new ideas. It's not so much progressive strength training as more so light physical activity and some balance ideas. Later Life Training also has an ICANN active calendar. I have the link there to the Clock Yourself app, which is the balance app I talked about. And the UK National Osteoporosis Foundation also has some resources. But we've done a lot of work on our Osteoporosis Canada resources, and I'd really love for you to check them out, and please share any feedback that you have. I will open it up for discussion, and I want to say that I did get a lot of questions. I wasn't able to get to them all, but hopefully I've answered a number of questions that came through. So I'll pause there and maybe we can answer some more questions.
Thank you very much, Laura. Now we'll move on to the question and answer session.
Questions. I can't see them. Are you going to moderate, or how do I see them? Oh, does elliptical machine count as impact? No, it does not. It is not an impact exercise. That's the only one I can see. I will say that I really want to encourage people to find strength exercises that really fit their routine, because strength training can have a really important impact on physical function and can prevent muscle loss over time, especially if you are finding that you're not able to stay active at home. There are lots of progressions that you can choose of exercises that you can do at home. I've given you some examples, but thinking about the concept of pushes and pulls and squats or sit to stands or hinges, lots of different versions of those that you can progress to.
Okay, so I'm not quite sure what happened about questions, Laura. Is it time for us to sign off?
I don't know. I don't know what time it is.
It's
just through the list.
Hi, Laura. It's Matthew here. The questions should be appearing in your questions dialogue.
Yeah, I can't see them. So maybe you could read them. Oh wait, hold on. No, I still can't see them.
Okay, I'll read some of them out for you then.
That would be great. Thank you.
So, first question. I thought that the more exercises, the better, but I was told that 20 minutes twice a week is good enough. What is your recommendation?
So the National Physical, it depends on the type of exercise. So you want to do exercises that get your heart pumping, you know, about at least 20 minutes a day. Like, but that could be parts of your daily activity if you're working hard, like if you're going out for walks and that sort of thing. For strength training, we want to challenge all of our major muscle groups at least twice a week. So you could, as long as you're doing the challenging all of your major muscle groups at least twice a week, that's the minimum that we recommend. You can do it more often, but doing too much is probably not a good idea either. So at least twice a week for challenging major muscle groups. And then I usually tell people to find an activity that challenges their balance and try to integrate it into their day on a daily basis, just to kind of work on their balance. So and you don't necessarily you can do balance training as part of your strength training. Like, for example, if you're doing lunges for your strength training exercise, that will also challenge your balance. So you don't need to do a separate exercise for balance. Or if you're doing, you know, going out for a walk, if you add some walking lunges or add a tandem walk to your walk, then that's incorporating a balance challenge, right? So it's thinking about how to be efficient. And maybe you just do a little bit every day. Like, sometimes I'll just come into my basement and I'll do some push-ups and some lunges, and I'll just do push-ups and then lunges and then push-ups and then lunges, and that's my exercise for the day. And then the next day I might do something different. So the idea that you don't necessarily have to do these big long workouts is just trying to fit all of these pieces into your daily life, as long as you're working your major muscle groups, all of your major muscle groups twice a week, and trying to get your heart pumping every day and challenge your balance.
When you're performing the hinge, do you look forward or do you look to the floor?
I look down and in front. So I look at, imagine something like on the floor out in front of me. So I don't look at the floor right in front of me, but out in front of me. So look forward and down.
And we have a number of questions with regards to high impact exercises. So the first one is, does the elliptical machine count as high impact exercise?
No, it does not. It's a good exercise for, you know, getting your heart pumping. A lot of people like it because it's easy on the knees, but it's not an impact exercise. And you know, the issue is there are some people who find it hard to do impact exercise. And so if it's painful for you, if you have disc issues or arthritis, then you know, maybe you do as much as you can, but you're not going to get to that high impact exercise. But that's where doing the muscle strengthening is even more important, to keep your muscles strong. And muscle strengthening is good for arthritis as well, and it's good for lots of other things.
Same question, but with regards to a treadmill, does that count as impact exercise?
No.
Walking would be low to moderate impact depending on how fast you're walking. But I would say it's more on the lower, like it's not a high impact exercise. Things like jumping would be more on the higher impact side. But again, it's not safe for people who are really high risk to probably just start initiating jumping, right? So even in that trial I told you about, they started with just heel drops, where they actually kind of come up on their toes and then dropped their heels, you know, to add impact. And then they eventually progressed to higher and higher impact. And again, even heel drops, if someone's got, you know, problems with their ankle joints in terms of arthritis, then that might be uncomfortable. So it really depends on the person. And so adding impact exercise sometimes requires a bit of insight on what you're capable of and how to progress it over time.
I've been told to never use weights above my head. Is that correct?
It may be correct for you, so it really depends on your individual circumstances. What I usually recommend to people is first focusing on shoulder mobility, because you shouldn't be lifting weights over your head if your shoulders don't have the range of motion to do it properly. So no one, not even young people. So I usually suggest that people start working on shoulder mobility and then eventually start adding resistance once they've got good mobility. Because if you have someone who's got shoulder impingement, you start adding weights, you can actually exacerbate the problem. So So it's better to work on the mobility and then eventually add resistance. So that would be what I would recommend for most people. And then if you have osteoporosis, especially if you're high risk and you start lifting weights overhead, you know, that could increase the risk of fracture. So it would be something I would progress slowly over time. So it's not to say that everybody with osteoporosis cannot do overhead presses, but it's not something I would start with. I would start with shoulder mobility. Then I would add shoulder mobility, like I would maybe do a broomstick press, like so going from the shoulder mobility exercise to the broomstick press, then maybe a resistance band press, and then I might start adding weight, broomstick press that with a weighted bar instead of a broomstick. So I would progress slowly over time based on someone's mobility and what I thought was safe for them. So it's starting where you're at. Hopefully that answers the question.
There are a number of questions with regards to knee problems. If I have osteoporosis and I have knee problems, is it safe for me to do exercises, and if so, which type?
So GLAD Canada has a program out that is specifically for knee osteoarthritis, and it has been shown to reduce pain. And a lot of the exercises are quite similar to what I'm suggesting. So making sure you work on your core, making sure you work on your leg muscles, like the strength of your leg muscles, like the sit to stands, those sorts of things. And then also working on hip mobility. So they'll do things like the bridging exercise that I suggested, which is a version of a hinge. They will also do gentle leg swings, they do lunges, and they really work on alignment. So making sure that the knees are aligned with the toes and aligned with the hips. So a lot of it is making sure you're doing the exercises properly, and then you absolutely can do them. So I think anyone, as long as they can get out of a chair, should be able to do a sit to stand or squat. There are versions of lunges that most people can do. It's just a matter of finding the version that fits for you, but really making sure that you're doing it with good posture and good alignment. So using a mirror and looking at where is my knee relative to my hips and my toes. So if you're doing a lunge, you know, your hips and your knees and should be aligned. Your knee should track track in line with your toes, but not go too far over your toes. So your knee should stay over your ankle. So it's thinking about doing it with good alignment so it's not painful. So some people will find, for example, they can't do a full squat because it hurts their knees, but they might be able to do a half squat. So that's where you start. You do a half squat, and maybe even add a little bit of weight in the half squat to improve your strength over time.
If someone has been previously engaging in regular high impact exercises like running, should they discontinue their running or reduce the intensity to walking if they are now at a higher risk of fractures?
That's a really hard question to answer because it will depend on the person's level of risk and what their, whether or not their risk in the next 10 years is high, and also how much they love running. Running is an impact exercise, and it is something that potentially could increase your risk if your bone density is really low, but there are also people who can run safely who have osteoporosis. So it's an individualized question, but I would say that there are other things that I would pay attention to. So is that runner underweight? Are they doing strength training? Are they doing things to stabilize their spine? So I would maybe step back and say, let's get those in place first. A lot of people focus on the aerobic exercise, but focusing on things for core stability, things for strength that are actually going to build bone density. And yeah, maybe easing back on the running or doing it lower impact, if they really, really want to do it and love it. But it also depends on the person's risk. Like if someone's high risk, I might say, they might need to ease back. It's hard to know unless I know the person. I hope that answers the question.
Does adding weights, for example, in a backpack when walking help with intensity?
I've not seen a study that actually looks at whether or not adding weights in a backpack walking can improve bone density. However, I would say that I feel like you're trying to combine two different goals. So the research that looks at impact exercise actually shows that short bouts of impact are what are effective, not long bouts. So you don't want to wear a backpack for a long period of time because I would do the walking for your cardiovascular exercise, and then I would do short bouts of impact, or I would do strength training to work on the bone strength, rather than trying to wear a backpack for a long time, which could create an overuse injury or could put a lot of stress. Because the types of impact exercise that tend to be effective are ones that are short bouts. So even in that trial that I talked about, the Lift More trial, where they did high impact exercise, they did like a few jumps. That's it, like less than 5. I think it was 5. I actually have to go back and look, but it was not a lot of jumps. So I would not go out and wear backpacks walking. No. I would wear a backpack during my squat. So this is where I would use the backpack. You don't have any weights at home, but you have a backpack. Put on the, if you can squat with body weight with good form and you need more of a challenge, put the backpack on and put some rice in it, like bags of rice or whatever, to add a little bit of weight. And that's a way you could add weight to your squat, right? To make it harder. If you can do the squat with good form, that would be a good way, right?
Okay, and we'll take 2 more questions. There's a large number of questions, but maybe we will we'll shoot the remainder of the ones over to you, and you can give us answers, and we'll send that out to all of the attendees. So the last 2 questions we'll address right now are there certain exercises that help with bone density in the hips versus the spine?
That's a really good question. So it's interesting, a lot of the studies that have been done that look at the effects of exercise on hip bone density, it's really hard to change the hip bone density, especially in people who have established osteoporosis. So even in the studies that have shown that the exercise improves relative to the control group, it's often because the control group is losing hip bone density and the exercise group is maintaining, not that there's large increases in hip bone density. But the types of exercises I would recommend are still the same, is strength training for major muscle groups and progressing impact exercise.
And last question, after doing strength exercises at high intensity, is it important to do stretching afterwards? And if so, can you speak to some stretches?
So I think it's important to have good mobile joints. So not that's the wrong word. I think it's good to make sure that we maintain the range of motion in the joints that we want. So, but I don't necessarily think you have to do stretching. So I actually prefer more dynamic mobility exercises, which is taking your joint through its range of motion in a gentle way. So that example that I had over where you stand against the wall and do the shoulder flexion, where you kind of just raise your arms overhead, that's an example of a dynamic mobility exercise where I'm taking my arm through its range of motion. And I would do the same for hips, like I would do gentle leg swings and rotations, and I would do gentle lunges that kind of take my hip flexors through a range of motion. But there's certainly nothing wrong with stretching, and there is some evidence to say that stretching can be beneficial for some people. So certainly you can do stretching. I wouldn't do stretching before exercise because some research has suggested that it's actually better to do it after. You should do a warm up before, so make sure you get your blood pumping. Rather than just lifting heavy weights right away, or any weights for that matter. So I would say a warm up before, do your exercise, and then you could do some mobility movements afterwards.
Oh, thank you so much, Laura, for a wonderful, comprehensive presentation and for answering so many questions. I'm sure that it's been very much appreciated by our participants. And thank you to your participants for coming and taking part. Stay safe, stay active.